Well, good morning. Thanks for watching with us this morning. My name is Joel, and I'm glad that you have made this a part of your day. We're excited about today. I hope you are too. We're excited to celebrate Easter and what it means, and we wish we were all gathered together. We wish that we were here corporately celebrating together. But what makes this day great is that even though we're not, we can still celebrate. We can still celebrate in the death and the burial, and most importantly, the resurrection of our Savior, Jesus Christ. And it's because of that, because of the resurrection, that we have hope and we have the peace that we need as we navigate through life and through these uncertain times. So thanks for being with us this morning. If you were with us last week, Pastor Andy issued this challenge of going on a 7-day adventure. Did you accept that challenge? Did you do that? How did that go for you? If you did, we would love to hear about it. Let Pastor Andy or myself know of how those 7 days went for you and how it's going for you just as you are deployed out into the community and the surrounding areas. We would love to hear those stories from you. Not a lot this morning in the way of announcements. The only thing that I want to make sure that you know, if you don't already, is that we send out 2 weekly emails. We send out a prayer email on Tuesday, and then we send out an announcement email on Thursday. That's a little bit different. Just started doing that in the last few weeks. If you're not on those email lists, we'd love to get you on those so you can stay informed as to the things that are happening. So just send us an email to office@panamabaptist.org, and we will make sure that you get on those lists so that you can stay up to date on the things that are happening. Again, a prayer email on Tuesday and then an announcement email on Thursday. Speaking of Easter, Pastor Andy and I got to thinking this week, what would it be like to do an Easter service when nobody was here and we're still trying to maintain our social distance? What would that be like? We do a lot of fun things on Easter. That we do the Easter breakfast, the sunrise breakfast. That's always a highlight. Of course, have a great time of singing and preaching from the Word. But what would it be like to do an Easter service with nobody here? I wonder what that would be like. Ah, yeah, boy, I don't like that at all. It is not the same without you here. We can't wait till we can all gather together again, whenever that may be. All right, let's turn it over to James now for some songs. I have loved each week listening to James and to Mary sing. They just do a phenomenal job. I'm excited to worship again this week.
Praises rising, eyes are turning to you. We turn to you. Hope is stirring, hearts are yearning for you. We long for you. 'Cause when we see you, we find strength to face the day. And in your presence, all our fears are washed away, washed away. Hosanna, Hosanna, you are the God who saved us, worthy of all our praises. Hosanna, Hosanna, come and you reign among us. We welcome you here, Lord Jesus. Hear the sound of hearts returning to you. We turn to you. In your kingdom, broken lives are made new. You make us new. 'Cause when we see you, we find strength to face the day. In your presence, all our fears are washed away, washed away. Hosanna, Hosanna, you are the God who saves us, worthy of all our praises. Hosanna, Hosanna, come and you reign among us. We welcome you here, Lord Jesus. Hosanna, Hosanna, you are the God who saves us, worthy of all our praises. Hosanna, Hosanna, come and you reign among us. We welcome you here, Lord Jesus. Above all powers, above all kings, above all nature and all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of men. You were there before the world began. Above all kingdoms, above all thrones, above all wonders the world has ever known, above all wealth and treasures of the earth. There's no way to measure what you're worth. Crucified, laid sacrifice you made. For all our sin and all our shame, you took the nails and took our place. No one else could do what you have done. One name is higher, one name is stronger than any grave, than any throne. Christ exalted over all. From the grave where death would die, you rose again and brought us life. You're reigning now, the Savior of the world. You're reigning now, the Savior of the world. One name is higher, one name is stronger than any grave, than any throne. Christ exalted over all. The only Savior, Jesus Messiah. To you alone our praise belongs. Christ exalted over all. We sing your praise, we sing your praise, we sing your praise forever. And lift your name, we lift your name, Jesus over all. We'll sing your praise, we sing your praise, we'll sing your praise forever. And lift your name, we lift your name, Jesus over all. We'll sing your praise, we'll sing your praise, we'll sing your praise forever. And lift your name, we lift your name, Jesus over all. One name is higher, one name is stronger than any grave, than any throne. Christ exalted over all. The only Savior, Jesus Messiah. To you alone our praise belongs. Christ exalted over all. One name is higher, one name is stronger than any grave, than any throne. Christ exalted over all. The only Savior, Jesus Messiah. To you alone our praise belongs. Christ exalted over all.
Well, good morning. Hope you're having a great Easter Sunday morning. Hope you've really enjoyed the worship time together so far this morning. It's been great to be with you. It's also great fun to be speaking to a different congregation this morning. Not that I don't like all of you and not that I don't enjoy what we're doing online, but this morning when we came in to film, we found that we have a brand new congregation of wonderful folks who are here. Each one of them is highly expressive. Each one has a bit of feedback for Joel and for myself. And yet they're incredibly quiet and really well behaved. So really enjoying this brand new congregation that we have to speak to this morning. I had a dark day a little over a week ago. I was working through some of the brutal facts about this whole COVID-19 crisis thing, thinking through what was coming, and what really hit me and kind of made it such a dark time was this realization that things are not getting better yet. They're still getting worse. We have not reached the bottom yet. We are sinking down into the abyss, so to speak. The health crisis may or may not have plateaued, but I realized that after this comes a tsunami. You know, after an earthquake at sea, there's all the the stuff that happens with the great shaking. But then after that, a few days later, there's this giant tidal wave that comes and just devastates the shoreline and goes for miles inland. And that's kind of how I was feeling on that day, was the realization of the tsunami that is coming and the fact that we're still headed down into the abyss. We're not climbing up the other side yet. This tsunami that I'm kind of referencing has a whole lot of aspects to it. Aftershocks, or the waves, the tidal wave of mental health. I think we're going to be facing that as a group. We're going to see that due to this prolonged time of anxiety and stress, a lot of people have developed some real struggles with their mental health. Everybody I've talked to is expecting a tidal wave of difficulty related to the economy. You can't have millions of people who are unemployed and businesses shut down and the government borrow $2 trillion and not have a long-term effect on our economy. And then part of this tsunami too is what I fear is probably taking place that during this time when people are cooped up at home and there's a lot of stress and a lot of uncertainty and anxiety going on, that we're going to find out during this time there was a real uptick in abuse and domestic violence. I fear that we'll also find there was a huge increase in addiction as people were looking for different ways to try to work through or at least escape some of the pain and the uncertainty that they were facing. I think part of the tsunami as well that's coming is the societal change and upheaval that we're going to face. Nobody knows how this is going to turn out, but every expert is agreeing on one thing, that life after COVID-19 will be different than life before COVID-19 was. And then added to that tsunami, I think, is just the grief of countless personal losses, the birthday parties that didn't happen, the rites of passages that our students missed, maybe senior prom and certain other things like that, and so many other just personal losses that have to be grieved. And so as I was thinking about that, it was a dark day. It was a dark day. But these are the brutal facts that we have to face. Honestly, as a pastor, I need to face these facts and know that they're going to impact our church, and they're going to impact our congregation, and they're going to impact our community. We have to face these facts as family members and as friends and as neighbors and as citizens. And when we start thinking about it, just how brutal they really are and how dark some of these realities really are and can be, it's enough to make someone stressed, even to the point of being distressed. And it's enough to make someone anxious, even to the point of being afraid. It's enough to even make somebody lose their hope. But hope is one of the big things that Jesus followers get from following Jesus. It's one of the great things that we get, that Jesus gives to us, is hope. And so today, what I want to do in our time together, I want to look at, number one, our hope. What is this hope that we have as followers of Jesus? And number two, how do we leverage our hope in the face of the brutal facts? Our text for today, and actually for the next 3 weeks, is Romans chapter 12, verse 12. And just so that we're all on the same page, I want to review a little bit of the context. This verse that we're going to look at in a couple minutes was written by Paul. Paul lived a few years after Jesus. He was Jewish. He hated Christians and was trying to do everything he could to stomp out Christianity. During that process, he had an encounter with God and became a Christian himself. That changed everything. From that point on, he wanted to tell the whole world about Jesus. And so he began to travel around the known world of that time, starting churches and encouraging churches that were already going. As part of his ministry, he wrote to groups of Christians in key cities where he had started churches, and also in key cities where he was hoping to visit someday. This verse that we're going to look at is part of a letter that Paul wrote to Christians in ancient Rome. And the chapter and verse that we're looking at today is near the end of his letter, and it's in a section that some people may call, or as a descriptive term, Christian ethics. It's a description that explains that this part of the letter are some ideas that Paul is giving to Christians as to how do you live like a Christian in your current context. It could just as easily have this description, though, instead. It could be called Tips for Doing Well While Deployed in a Distressing Situation That is Beyond Your Control to Solve. Because, see, Paul was writing to Christians who were beginning to experience persecution at the hands of the Roman Empire. And they lacked security. They knew that things were bad, and they had every reason to believe that things were going to get worse. And there was nothing really that they could do about that. And so he was giving them advice to how to handle and how to even thrive in that kind of a dark environment. So here we go. Romans chapter 12, verse 12. Let's read it together. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in affliction. Be persistent in prayer. That's the whole thing. And if you read it in the language Paul wrote it in, it's even shorter. It's only 6 words. But in English, rejoice in hope. Be patient in affliction. Be persistent in prayer. So in order to really make sense of this verse, and we're actually only going to look at the first 3 words, the first part today, rejoice and hope. In order to make sense of this part, we need to really understand, what does Paul mean when he uses that word hope? Because we sometimes use hope in our context to be a variety of different things. Often it's not much more than wishful thinking. For example, I really hope that the Buffalo Bills make it to the playoffs this year and win. I really don't know if that's going to happen or not. I hope it does. I wish that it would happen. That's not the kind of hope that Paul is talking about, and that's not the kind of hope that the New Testament describes for us. In the New Testament, when it uses this word hope, what it means is this: a confident expectation in light of the evidence. Let me say that again. Hope equals a confident expectation in light of the evidence. When we moved to Portugal, I started a brand new routine with my daughters, Alyssa and Becca, and I would get up every Saturday morning, and I took them to the local cafe, and Becca would get the largest coffee she could get, which still wasn't very big. If you've been to Portugal, you know what I'm talking about. Alyssa would get her smaller one, and they would each get a pastry, and we would spend some time together and then go for a walk afterwards. And that became part of our routine, and they look forward to that every single Saturday. We did that. When Alyssa went off to college, Becca and I continued that routine, and I would take her out every Saturday. We would go, we'd get her a coffee, she'd get a pastry, almost always something very, very chocolate and decadent. Fortunately, for her, she could afford that, calorie-wise, and this was not very expensive. It was like $1.60 for a coffee and pastry. And so we would do this tradition every Saturday. We'd go out, and we'd go for a walk, spend some time together. I can tell you this, that since we've moved back, Becca is still enjoying that tradition. We've had to modify it a little bit. Last Saturday, it meant we jumped in the car together, drove 3 blocks to Tim Hortons, ordered our breakfast sandwiches, drove back home, ate them, and then went for a walk. But I can tell you this, Becca lives with the hope that I will take her out on Saturday morning. Now, that's a reasonable expectation for her. It's not wishful thinking. She has every reason to believe that's what's going to happen, because I've said that's what I will do, and that's what's happened in the past. There is a lot of evidence for it. That's how our hope is too. It is a confident expectation backed up by a whole lot of evidence. So what is our hope? What is the hope, or what do followers of Jesus confidently expect? Well, there's a whole lot of things in that category. I want to hit just 3 of them this morning. Number 1, our hope, what we confidently expect is this: that we will experience life after death. We'll experience life after death. In another letter that Paul wrote, this one to Christians in Thessalonica, he said these things. He said, "We don't want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, concerning those who are asleep." Now, he uses that word asleep there. It's kind of a euphemism. It means those who are dead. But I think Paul's using it not just to be kind of polite and as a euphemism. He's using it as well to highlight the fact that it's not permanent. See, when someone's asleep, they're not permanently asleep. They wake back up. And for the Christian, we know that when somebody dies, that's not permanent. God will resurrect that person. They will come back to life. And so Paul uses this word asleep to kind of highlight that for us. So he writes, again, verse 13 of 1 Thessalonians 4, "We don't want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, concerning those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve like the rest who have no hope. And we have a hope. It's a different hope, the hope that we will be resurrected. Verse 14, for if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and we do, in the same way through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. In other words, God will bring back to life those who've died, just like Jesus was brought back to life. Verse 16, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the archangel's voice, and with a trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are still alive, who are left, we will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord. That's our hope. In the same way that Jesus was brought back to life, we'll be brought back to life. Now, that's an amazing promise and a great thing to expect, but how do we know? I mean, what's the evidence? Well, the evidence is that Jesus predicted his own death and resurrection. He predicted that he would die and how he would die, that he would be crucified. And then it happened, and he was laid into a tomb, and people were concerned because he'd also predicted that he would rise again on the third day. And so those who didn't want that to happen were concerned that somehow something would happen. And so when he was put into that tomb, they had a stone rolled in front of that tomb. They had that tomb sealed, and then it was guarded by Roman soldiers who were guarding it on the very condition that their lives would be forfeit if anything happened to that tomb. Well, Jesus rose again on the third day, came out of the tomb, and over the next several weeks was seen by over 500 different witnesses. And at one point, 500 at one time. That's the evidence. Jesus predicted his own death and resurrection and then pulled it off. See, our faith, guys, it's important to remember, our faith is based on a historical event. It's not based on a philosophy. It's not based on someone's idea. It's not even based just on a Bible verse. Our faith, our hope is based on something that has already happened in the past. That's what gives us confidence that when God says he'll raise us again, that will happen in the future. There's a second part of our hope, and it's this. God will use every hardship we face to make us more like God. God will use every hardship that we face to make us more like God. Or put another way, God will redeem our pain. Now, we're going to talk more about hardship next week, so I won't get into that today. But other than just to say that this is the promise. In Romans 8:28 through 30, Jesus makes a God makes a promise for his followers to use every single thing that happens to us to help us become more like God. He says, the moment we get saved, we receive this promise that for the rest of our lives, regardless of what happens to us, regardless of how it happens to us, regardless of who might be behind it, and regardless of the motives behind whoever might be behind whatever happens to us, God will twist it, turn it, do whatever it takes in order to bring good out of that event, out of those circumstances, and that he will help us become like God, like Jesus in our character. He will use every hardship, and he will finish everything that he has started. There's a third aspect to our hope that I want to hit this morning, and it is this. We will experience God's complete solution to every problem that sin created. And sin created a lot of problems. And again, in Paul's letter to the Romans in chapter 8, verses 18 through 25, he talks about what we're looking forward to, what our hope is. And our hope is that God will restore everything that has been destroyed or damaged by our sin. In those verses, Paul talks about how creation is just groaning, longing for the day when all the destruction and the pollution and the devastation that's happened to creation will be made right and creation will be restored. And he also references our adoption to sonship. In other words, Paul's talking about we look forward to that day when not only is creation restored, but so is our relationship with God restored. Instead of being at odds with God, instead of being enemies of God or people who distrust God, people who disobey God, the day will come when God will bring a complete solution to that, and he will completely save us, and we will be adopted to sonship. And then he lastly talks about how the redemption of our bodies is another part of that complete solution that God has for us. I don't have to tell you that our bodies are decaying, that as we age, they're breaking down, that things that used to be easy are getting harder with every passing year. And so Paul looks forward to, and he reminds us that we have as part of our hope the promise that after death we'll receive a new body, a body like that is eternal and spiritual like God's, an amazing body. And so we will experience, this is part of our hope, we will experience God's complete solution to every single problem that sin created. That means when we get to heaven, there'll be no punishment for all the times that we've disobeyed, distrusted, or dishonored God. It means when we get to heaven and when God's solution is fully implemented, we will no longer have a divided heart. You know what I'm talking about, that heart that wants to trust God and at the same time wants to take revenge. That heart that wants to be loving and at the same time wants to be selfish. That heart that wants to wait and at the same time experience forbidden pleasures. We'll experience God's solution to that. We'll experience complete solution, and there'll be no more tears and no more broken relationships and no more death. Just the unhindered friendship with God. Well, that's a lot to look forward to. That's a huge promise for God to deliver on. How do we know that he'll actually do it? What is the evidence in the past that gives us confidence in that hope for the future? Romans chapter 8, verse 32. He did not even spare his own son, but offered him up for us all. How will he not also with him grant us everything? And the answer is he will. He will grant us everything. He will do everything he's promised. If he didn't spare, if he didn't hold back his own son, if God allowed Jesus to come to earth and be crucified for us, doesn't it make every sense, every bit, it's every reasonable, we have every reason to believe that he will do the rest of what he has promised and all that he started. It makes no sense to believe that God will have done all of that, paid such a high price, and now will quit and not deliver on the promises that he has made. So that's our hope. Here's what I want us to walk away with this morning. What I want us to do is to know at the very center of our being, deepest depths of our hearts, Jesus' followers have a hope that is just as real and certain as their stress and their pain. Let me say that again. Jesus' followers have a hope that is just as real and certain as their stress and their pain. Now let me ask a rhetorical question, because we're not actually physically gathered together, so I can't wait for your response. Here's the question. Do we take our pain seriously? Well, yeah, we do. I mean, we do all kinds of things to try to deal with our pain, to cope with our pain. We medicate, we go places, we do therapy, we eat foods that promise us comfort, right? We do all kinds of things to take our pain seriously. Why? Because our pain is real and it really affects our daily life. I have a friend who's reminded me several times that pain changes us. So we take our pain seriously. Here's the follow-up question. Do we take our hope seriously? Do we take our hope seriously? I know this, that when we take our hope as seriously as we take our stress and our pain and our anxiety, we will experience joy, and that joy changes our present and our future. And here's what I mean by that. When we take our hope as seriously as we take our stress or pain or our anxiety, we get a different perspective when we take our hope that seriously. And that perspective on the present helps us to think differently about what we're going through right now. And then that helps us to enter into the future with a more confident attitude and take different steps than we would have taken had we not had taken our hope so seriously. We experience joy that brings a change in our present and a change in our future. Not our long-term future. Our long-term future is guaranteed. That's secure. I'm talking about the near-term future as we continue to live our days here on earth, our lives here on earth. I read this week in Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, about the Stockdale paradox. I want to read to you a little bit of that. So forgive me, I'm going to look down at my Kindle here. But this name, the Stockdale paradox, that name refers to Admiral Jim Stockdale, who was the highest ranking United States military officer in the Hanoi Hilton prisoner of war camp during the height of the Vietnam War. He was tortured over 20 times during his 8-year imprisonment from 1965 to 1973. Stockdale lived out the war without any prisoner's rights, no release date that was ever set, no certainty as to whether he would even survive to see his family again. He shouldered the burden of command, doing everything he could to create conditions that would increase the number of prisoners who would survive unbroken, while at the same time fighting an internal war against his captors and their attempts to use prisoners for propaganda. At one point, he beat himself with a stool and cut himself with a razor, deliberately disfiguring himself so that he could not be put on videotape as an example of a well-treated prisoner. He exchanged secret information, intelligence information, with his wife through their letters, knowing that the discovery would mean more torture and perhaps death. He instituted rules that would help people to deal with torture, because no one can resist torture indefinitely. So he created a stepwise system. For example, after X minutes, you can say certain things. And that system gave the men milestones to survive toward. He instituted an elaborate internal communication system to reduce the sense of isolation that their captors tried to create, which used this communication system used a 5x5 matrix of tap codes for alpha characters. At one point, during an imposed silence, the prisoners mopped and swept the central yard using the code, swish-washing out, "We love you," to Stockdale on the 3rd anniversary of his being shot down. So Jim Collins continues and talked about how he was able to set up an appointment to meet with Admiral Stockdale and ask him, about it and how he survived. Jim writes, "In preparation, I read In Love and War, the book Stockdale and his wife had written in alternating chapters chronicling their experiences during those 8 years. As I moved through the book, I found myself getting depressed. It just seemed so bleak, the uncertainty of his fate, the brutality of his captors, and so forth. And then it dawned on me. Here I am, sitting in my warm, comfortable office, looking out over the beautiful Stanford campus on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. I'm getting depressed reading this, and I know the end of the story. I know that he gets out, reunites with his family, becomes a national hero, and gets to spend the latter years of his life studying philosophy on this same beautiful campus. If it feels depressing for me, how on earth did he deal with it when he was actually there and did not know the end of the story?" "I never lost faith in the end of the story," he said when I asked him. "I never doubted not only that I would get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event of my life, which in retrospect, I would not trade." Jim writes, I didn't say anything for many minutes, and we continued the slow walk toward the faculty club, Stockdale limping and arc swinging his stiff leg that had never fully recovered from repeated torture. Finally, after about 100 meters of silence, I asked, "Who didn't make it out?" "Oh, that's easy," he said. "The optimists." "The optimists? I don't understand." I said, now completely confused, given what he'd said 100 meters earlier. "The optimists. Oh, they were the ones who said, 'We're going to be out by Christmas.' And then Christmas would come, and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, 'We're going to be out by Easter,' and Easter would come, and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart." Another long pause, and more walking. Then he turned to me and said, "This is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. You must maintain unwavering faith that you can and will prevail in the end, regardless of the difficulties, and at the same time, Have the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. Folks, this is what God wants us to do as Christians. He wants us to confront the brutal facts. This crisis we're in is going to have profound implications. There's going to be substantial pain now and for days and months and perhaps years to come. Those facts we must face, we must address so that we can do ministry and love in the name of Christ, so we can love God and love others well. But at the same time, we must never lose our hope. We must take our hope as seriously as we take our pain and our stress. Why? Because our hope is real and it is certain. So how do we do that? How do we take our hope seriously? Well, let's go back to Romans chapter 12, verse 12 again. This is the advice Paul gave us. Rejoice in hope. Rejoice in the hope that Jesus died and rose again to give us. So how do you do that? How do you take your hope completely seriously? How do you leverage it in the face of the facts? I've scribbled out a few thoughts for you that I believe will help. 4 different things, and these are ideas, these are steps, and at the same time, it's part of a process that I believe if we will take these steps as we rejoice, these 4 things that help us rejoice, I think it'll create what is called a virtuous cycle. It's a spiral that takes us back upward as we rejoice in hope. So here they are, 4 things that we do as part of rejoicing in hope. Number 1 is remember. Remember the hope you have. Think about the hope that you have. Some aspect of it, whether it's the fact that we will experience life after death, or God will redeem our pain, or that God will completely solve every problem sin created, or other parts of our hope. But think about that piece of the hope that we have that pertains maybe to the brutal fact that we're wrestling with at the moment. The second step in our process of rejoicing in hope is to affirm. Affirm our belief, our confidence that this hope is indeed true, that we can look forward to it with confident expectation because there's good evidence for it in the past as well as a promise for the future. The third step in the process is to thank. Thank God for this aspect of our hope. Thank Him for the good things that are coming, and thank Him that He will indeed come through for us. And then lastly, act. Ask ourselves, what would a person with this hope do in this set of circumstances? And then do that. Do what a person with this hope would do in the present circumstances. These 4 things, this is what it means, I believe, to rejoice in hope. I want to point out that to take our hope seriously by rejoicing is a very proactive action in the face of things that we cannot control. It is a proactive action, this rejoicing in hope, that leads to an emotion that's more than an emotion. It's actually a state of being called joy. We talked about it a few weeks ago during our emotion series. And joy, as you might recall, is a pervasive sense of well-being. This pervasive sense that, in spite of all the brutal realities that are going on around me, there is more. And my hope is real and is certain, and therefore I'm okay. A pervasive sense of well-being. This joy then fuels peace, and it also fuels more rejoicing. That's why we get this upward spiral that I was referencing a moment ago. And of course, I have to be honest and point out the fact that a person can't rejoice in a hope if they don't have it. You can't rejoice in a hope that you don't have. As Christ followers, we have hope and we rejoice in that. But not everyone has that hope. I'm thinking right now specifically of 2 groups that may not have this hope yet. And please hear me, I am in no way picking on you whatsoever. Instead, I want to give you hope in this next moment. I want to talk first to the group of people who've never received it. I want you to hear from me that hope is a byproduct of a relationship with God. And a relationship with God is available to everyone, but it's not automatic. God wants to be in a relationship with us, and He wants to give His followers hope. But that's not automatic for us. We actually have to enter that relationship. We have to say yes. And it starts like this. The way we enter that relationship is to very simply come to God and say, God, I understand. I get it. I have disobeyed you many times. I have distrusted your heart towards me. I have disliked you. I have not honored you as God. I have disrespected you. And I realize that that is wrong. And I need your forgiveness. And I don't understand everything, but I believe that when Jesus came and that he died on the cross and was buried and rose again, that somehow what he did for me, and that will enable you to forgive me. And so, God, I'm asking you, would you please give me your forgiveness? And God, second, I want more than your forgiveness. I also want your friendship. I want to be restored to you. I want to walk with you, and I want to know you. And lastly, God, I want your leadership. I've lived my life following whatever rules and ideas I thought made for the best life and how I should live. But God, I want to live the way you want me to live. I want to follow you and your guidance. So I want your leadership. Friends, that's how we get into a relationship with God. And then when we enter that relationship, he has promised us that when we ask him and say, God, I confess my sin and I'm asking for your forgiveness and I'm trusting in you that you will give me your friendship and your leadership. God has promised that he will do that. He will do that. And we have that hope instantly. Now, I realize I've explained that very quickly, and I would be very happy to explain it more fully. If you'd like, you can contact me. My email address is there, or we may have other forms of communication. You can reach out to Pastor Joel or myself with no obligation whatsoever. We just want to explain to you, give you a more full explanation how we can have hope. The other group that I want to talk to for just a moment are those people who've known this, and they've heard this. Perhaps they've trusted in this. Perhaps you've grown up in our church, or you've grown up in a Christian home. Your parents have told you these things, and Pastor Andy didn't say anything new to you today, but you've never actually owned this. You've never owned your faith. It's still it's something you kind of believe in, but you haven't wrestled with it for yourself, and you still haven't completely thought it through and said, do I believe this for myself? Do I have faith in this? I want to speak to you for just a second and encourage you. What you can do is to take the same steps that I laid out a minute ago of how we rejoice in hope. But for you, I want to encourage you to spend more time in the affirm stage. I want you to look at the things that we believe and say, in light of the fact that Jesus predicted his own death and resurrection and then pulled it off, is it reasonable to believe the rest of what he said? Do I have confidence in him and his promises and his predictions? And as you wrestle with that and you affirm that for yourself, your faith, I believe, will grow and you will own it, and the hope will become yours as well. For the rest of us, those who claim to be followers of Jesus, who have this hope already, I want us to remember that we have a hope that is just as real and just as certain as the stress and the pain that we face. And we want to take that hope seriously. How? Rejoice in hope. Rejoice in hope. I want to pray for us. Father, I want to thank you so much for the hope that you've given to us. Thank you that the things we've talked about today are true. Thank you that there's so much more to our hope than even what we talked about today. I pray that you will help us this day and this week to take our hope as seriously as the pain and stress we face, because it is every bit as real. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Our praise team is going to come, lead us in a song of hope. I trust it'll be an encouragement to you. Have a great week. Praying for you. Take your hope seriously. Rejoice in hope. Looking forward to our next part of the study. Thanks. Have a great day.
Is our hope in life and death? Christ alone, Christ alone. What is our only confidence? That our souls to Him belong, who holds our days within us know in a great Redeemer's blood, who holds our faith when fears arise, who stands above the stormy trial, who sends the waves that bring us nigh unto the shore, the rock of Christ. Oh, sing hallelujah, our hope springs eternal. Oh, sing hallelujah, now and ever we confess Christ our hope in life and death. Unto the grave, what will we sing? Christ he lives, and what reward will heaven bring? Everlasting life with him, there we will rise to meet the Lord, then sin and death will be destroyed, and we will feast in endless joy when Christ is ours forevermore. Oh, sing hallelujah, our hope springs eternal. Oh, sing hallelujah, now and ever we confess Christ our hope in life and death. Oh, sing hallelujah, our hope springs eternal. Oh, sing hallelujah, now and ever we confess Christ our hope in life and death. Now and ever we confess Christ our